Since I already covered 1881 in the last video, I'm going to start the year with 1882. A French explorer is the first European to discover an Inca city in Argentina. The first cargo of frozen meat leaves New Zealand on its way to England. And speaking of England, Queen Victoria survives an assassination attempt. A Norwegian scientist heads to the Arctic, and a German scientist discovers tuberculosis and establishes germ theory. Stateside, Jesse James is assassinated, the electric iron is patented in New York, and a tornado in Iowa kills 130 people. And finally, a man that is known as handsome and presidential looking is inaugurated. I think it should be noted that Chester A. Arthur was granted by Grant 10 years prior the position of administrator of the Customs House, which was one that was hotly debated in the last video talking about Garfield between him and Senator Conkling. So when all those issues arose between the senator and the president in the last tenure, this guy took the side of the senator over the president, whom he was directly underneath. That was quite a drama. Another issue with Arthur being president is beforehand he was a big fan of the spoils system, which means he was hiring people and kept people on at the Customs House who probably shouldn't be employed, at least not there. He employed them based on their political affiliation. And that's why Senator Conkling liked him so much. But during the Hayes administration, he had been dismissed for that. They were trying to reform, and as you know, many attributed Garfield's death to a failure in the civil service system. And Conkling tried to fight back by working to get Grant renominated to lead the party and I guess, be president again. And as you know, that failed, and Garfield became president, and then, of course, when he passed, then Arthur became president. So all of that he had been known for beforehand took a massive turn once he actually was elevated to presidency. He decided that he no longer wanted to be associated with all of the spoil system and the failure of the civil service system, etc. He wanted to be something different. A viewpoint that we've heard before is Arthur no longer wanted to be viewed as part of any political party. In his mind, he is now above political parties as the president. And he decided to ghost his former political friends, and he became what they call a man of fashion. As a man of a new elite status, he is now a fan of civil service reform. To get a better picture of how much he changed to become president, I quote, "No man ever entered the presidency so profoundly and so widely distrusted, and no one ever retired more generally respected." As we head into 1882, a new bill is approved that will allow the census to dictate how many representatives we have in Congress. A month later, the Edmunds Act passes, and it says no polygamists or bigamists are able to vote or hold office. Around the same time, President Arthur decides to veto a Chinese Immigration Act that comes through his office. Essentially, it says that Chinese are not allowed to immigrate here for 20 years. Now remember, we had signed a Chinese-American treaty that said we were allowed to suspend, but we couldn't stop the immigration entirely, right? We all remember this. Well, this treaty is kind of funny because it says, well, we're not stopping it, we're just pausing it for 20 years. Also, the Chinese who are already here, we're not giving them citizenship. But later, this would be revised. And so instead of 20 years, it goes down to 10. And somehow that gets approved. But they still aren't allowed to have citizenship. So unfortunately, that particular law, it gets renewed. And so every time it comes up, every 10 years it comes up, it just keeps getting renewed well into the next century. You may be wondering, why are we picking on Chinese immigrants? If you remember when we were talking about the massive B&O Railroad strike, it ended with violence. Instead of people being angry at the railroad, it ended with violence towards the Chinese workers. And so the railroad, the Labor Party, came up with all of this stuff against the Chinese immigrants because of that. But just to make sure that it doesn't look racist, they have another immigration law which excludes criminals, lunatics, and paupers. In May, Korea is recognized by the U.S. as independent. And in 83 of the following year, we have the Pendleton Act, which I've talked about before, because essentially it was passed as a civil service reform, making it so where people aren't needing to worry about their job based on their political affiliation. It's a direct response to Garfield's assassination. The Tariff Act of 1883 was really interesting because it was one Arthur pushed really hard to get tariffs, the percentage down by like 20 to 25% because the tariffs were just so high. But the rest of the Republican Party wasn't in favor of that. In fact, the act passed to only reduce the tariffs by 2%. This at this point in time is when the Republican Party starts being associated with high tariffs. Arthur finds out in mid-83 that the Navy is in dire need. So they approve a bill to get the Navy their very first steel vessels. And speaking of improvements, finally, after years, the Brooklyn Bridge has been completed. And to celebrate, Arthur is here with the governor of New York, who is Grover Cleveland, a name we'll hear again. And it is a huge fanfare. It was the longest suspension bridge in the world when it was built, and it's still a testament to engineering feat today. We also joined the international community this year to standardize time, and at the same time, Congress felt like it was a good idea to finally put some sort of government in Alaska, which we had rule over for the last 17 years. The Bureau of Labor is established, not to be confused with the Department of Labor, which will come in 29 years. On July 1st, Arthur issues a proclamation for no one to settle in Oklahoma, and then a few days later, on the 4th, France gives us the Statue of Liberty in Paris. The following February, the Washington Monument is ready and to be dedicated in Washington, D.C. Then the contract labor law was passed, and it kept companies from bringing in cheaper labor from outside the U.S. in. And a short time later, the election season was heating up, and Arthur did a good job at trying to seem like he was in it for the win, but the truth was he didn't care so much about getting the nomination because he already knew that he was dying. Shortly after becoming president, he found out he had fatal kidney disease. The following year, after leaving the White House, he passed away at home. Tune in next time as we discuss the first Democrat president to hold office since the Civil War.